Om Tyagishwaram Ramakrishnam Saradam Matrarupem Vivekanandamacharyam Natva Bhakshyami Shuddhaya. In our last class, we discussed how Narada tells us the ways or the way of giving a higher direction, higher purpose to our own drives and emotions. That's what is called transmuting or sublimating our energies. See, success in any endeavor, even in this world, depends on how much we are invested in that particular endeavor. More invested we are, more chances of our achieving success. So it's true of spiritual life also. The difference being, in worldly endeavors, our commitment is limited to a certain time. Whereas in spiritual life, there is no specific time for which we have to be committed, and then we can have other commitments. We can't be, it has to be full-time job. So that's what Narada Maharshi tells. We are interested in this world, it becomes difficult. It becomes the spiritual life. Why is spiritual life so difficult? Because we are interested in the world. Our interests rest in the world. And our emotions, likes, dislikes, hatred, fear, they all center around objects of this world, objects or people of this world, positions of this world. This world is where we are interested in. That has been our trend of our life for life after life, basically. And following those emotions, following those likes and dislikes, we work. We work physically, we work mentally. So that's how it has been. And then when we want to love God, we want to develop this love of God, we have to reverse, so to say, this whole flow of psychic energy which is going out. We have to reverse its direction, and because God has to be loved with all heart. God cannot be one of the many things we love. I mean, it is good to love God amongst other things. There is no doubt about it. But what we are talking here is prema bhakti. So there is a very higher form of love, and that doesn't tolerate any sharer in our love. God and God alone should be one object of our love. So the emotions which are going out, they have to be turned inward, so to say. And that's what is called transmutation. This love of God is nothing but the refined product of this love of God is nothing but refined product of our emotions, of our drives, our greed, our hatred, our lust, our fears, our anger. All these, when they are transmuted, sublimated, these turn into love of God. Love of God doesn't come from somewhere. We have this psychic energy that we have, which is now manifesting itself in all these forms towards the world. That energy itself is taken and sublimated, and what we get out of that is the love of God. And that's how we find the lovers of God, those who are true lovers of God. They don't have worldly desires or angers or hatred. They don't have, because that same energy which was manifesting as desires and angers and hatreds, that has been sublimated into love of God. So love of God is a refined product of this process of sublimation, and the raw material are our present emotions, present drives, so to say. So that this is very subjective exercise. Subjective in the sense we all have certain drives that are common, but their strength differs from person to person. So we have to study ourselves and handle ourselves. The idea is this: all the drives that we have, these have to be sublimated into love of God. That becomes a task for life, so to say, for a spiritual aspirant. The other problem is, you see, we can't just put our hand into our mind and divert or give direction to these emotions towards God. It's not possible. So how do these manifest, these drives? How do they manifest? How can we control them? So they manifest in actions, mental actions and physical actions, both. Our desires, our hatreds, our fears, our ambitions, whatever we call, they manifest in mental or physical actions. That is where we can control them, we can get hold of them. We can't get hold of them in their subtle form, but when they manifest in mental actions, when we start thinking about them, or when we start acting on them, then that is where they come within the field of our control, in the purview of our control, and that's where we have to control them. And this is what is called the struggle of a sadhaka. Sadhaka struggle, this is what it is. Due to the past impressions, the mind wants to take this external, this route of going out into the world. And sadhaka has understood that this is counterproductive. We have to turn it, give it a Godward direction. This is the struggle. The mind and body trying to go in one direction, and the sadhaka trying to give a different directions to those drives and impulses. This is the struggle, and for that sadhaka has to be first very careful, observant about his or her mind, mainly mind, as to what kind of thoughts are going on in the mind. Because that's where the whole thing begins, and that's where we have control. And this is what is called the battle, or whatever you call it, battle of spiritual life. Our mind becomes the battlefield, so to say. And we have to keep on doing it. The only point is, if we forcefully curb some of these tendencies, some of these drives, some of these emotions, and try to force them towards God, that will lead to complexes. That will lead to problems, psychological problems. Because we are dealing with energy, we are dealing with psychic energy. So we can't just shut our mind or force it to think in a certain direction. And that's where the element of bhakti comes in. Love. See, love makes one person do or not do anything. Nothing, there is no limit. So that love of God, that's what helps us do this. Change this course of the thought flow, so to say, course of our life going out of, then it doesn't become a complex. Then it becomes sublimation. It doesn't turn into a complex. This exercise doesn't turn into a complex when we do it for the love of God. Otherwise it will turn into a complex. So that's why Narada Maharshi says, Tadarpito akhila acharaha san. That is the first thing he tells. So by dedicating all actions unto God. So when we dedicate all actions, mental and physical, we are automatically careful. We don't want to think or do things that are not approved of by our beloved. Not naturally the control comes. And we want to do things which our beloved likes, loved. So the transformation, transmutation starts happening. This is how it happens when we dedicate all actions unto God. So when we do that, automatically our spending of energy in the outside world, that is stopped, that is directed towards God. We do things, we think thoughts that are loved by our God, by our beloved. So that's what is called transmutation. And he gives another, next is kama krodhadikam tasmin eva karanyam. So if you want to have desire for happiness, seek happiness in the company of the holy men and women, or seek happiness in the thought of God, in bhajana, whatever you call it. In whichever way, let our happiness revolve around God and His devotees. If we are to get angry, let us get angry at ourselves. So that's Sri Ramakrishna says, turn the direction of these drives. And this is, as I said, the crucial part of sadhana, because unless we have got control over our drives and turn them Godward, put them to a better use, there is little scope for us to really progress in spiritual life. Those who want to seriously advance in spiritual life, this energy that we have, it has to be put to the highest use. It has to be sublimated. And love of God manufactured out of this energy, which at present is manifesting itself at very low level in terms of desires and hatreds and fears. So that's what was told in the earlier class by Narada Maharshi. Now he, so to say, concludes this particular topic or subject, wherein he says, Trirupa Bhanga Purvakam Nityadasya Nityakanta Bhajanatmakam Premaiva Karyam. That's a sutra. Trirupa Bhanga Purvakam Nityadasya Nityakanta Bhajanatmakam Premaiva Karyam. That is the missionary of Bhakti, Narada Maharshi. He is telling Premaiva Karyam, emphasizing, take recourse only to this religion of love. Take recourse only to love. He's exhorting us. And he gives what kind of love? Now he says Bhajanatmakam. This love consists of loving service to the Lord in a spirit or with a relation of Nityadasya, eternal servant of God or eternal wife of God. Either of these. These are Narada's words. I'm just translating the sutra as it is. And so, take to love which is of the form of devoted service to God, with a relation or in a relationship as a servant of God, as eternal servant of God, or as an eternal wife of God. And before that, he says, Trirupa Bhanga Purvakam. Before doing this, you, so to say, transcend three forms of devotion. Trirupa Bhanga Purvakam. Purvakam is preceded by. So first, transcend Trirupa, three forms of devotion, three forms of bhakti. Having transcended these three forms of bhakti, you take recourse only to love, only to religion of love, which consists in devoted service of God, in the spirit of one's being an eternal servant of God or eternal wife of God. That is the translation. This Trirupa, or transcending the three forms of devotion, Narada Maharshi is referring to his own earlier sutra when he says Gauni Tridha Guna Bhedat Artadi Bhedadva. That was the sutra. So Gauni Bhakti, or the preparatory Bhakti, is of three forms, three types, based on Artha, Jignasu, or Artharthi, based on the motive, or Sattva, Raja, Tama. Guna Bhedat. Guna Bheda is Sattva, Raja, Tama. That is the way it manifests itself, the form of bhakti. And there is the motive of bhakti. In two ways, the bhakti was, so to say, divided in three forms, in three stages. Satvika Bhakti, Rajasika Bhakti, Tamasika Bhakti. And there was Artha Bhakti, Jignasa Bhakti, Artharthi Bhakti. And then it was said that Artha Bhakti is superior to Jignasu, and Jignasu is superior to Artharthi Bhakti. Artho Jignasa Artharthi. And Satvik Bhakti is superior to Rajasika Bhakti. Rajasika Bhakti is superior to Tamasika Bhakti. That was what told. Now here he says you transcend these three modes of devotion, these three modes of preparatory devotion. One has to transcend these. He uses the word bhanga, breaking, but it means transcending. Transcending. So transcending these three modes of devotion, love God. Take recourse to the love of God. Of course, we can't just transcend by our will. The idea would be, this is the ideal. He's placing before us the ideal. That we should reach a stage where we have transcended these three modes of bhakti, which are so to say modes of Gauni bhakti, and we should enter that kingdom of love, which is beyond these three modes of bhakti. So it is not something that we can actually do, but something which has to happen by our devotion, by our efforts. This will happen by our efforts. So this is more of an ideal. You see, we can understand Tamasika Bhakti we discussed earlier. Tamasika Bhakti is, there is no knowledge. Knowledge is absolutely absent in Tamasika Bhakti. There is blind adherence to rituals and all that. In Rajasika Bhakti, there is a lot of show. But in Sattvika Bhakti, there is not much of show, but there is knowledge. Knowledge of God, one's relation with God, and what one wants out of that. All that knowledge is there. In the Rajasika Bhakti, there is a lot of show. In Tamasika Bhakti, there is no Vidhi Nisheda, nothing is there, and there is ignorance. So one can understand Tamasika Bhakti has to be transcended by Rajasika Bhakti, and Rajasika Bhakti by Sattvika Bhakti. But here he says Trirupa Bhanga, you have to transcend even Sattvika Bhakti. Sattvika Bhakti also has to be transcended. So the idea is that this love of God, this prema that he is talking of, it will sweep oneself off one's feet. That all that knowledge of God and one's relation with God and all that will be swept off. Only love will remain. So all the different manifestations in the realm of gunas, whether it is sattvika or whatever, it will be swept off. It will not be there. Only love will reign in the heart of the devotee. That's the idea. So also about Artharthi and Jignasu and Artha. Artharthi was the person who seeks something from God and hence loves God. Something of the world from God and loves God. Jignasu was interested in knowing about God. And Artha was supposed to be superior to all these. Artha generally means person who loves God, who seeks God. Common parlance we say in order to get rid of some misery of the world. But since Artha devotee in this context has been said to be superior to even Jignasu, Artha will mean who is Artha on account of his or her separation from God, wants to be one with God, wants to be liberated from this bondage. So he or she is Artha for that. Artha on account of his or her being a bound soul, Ajnana. In the realm of he or she is in the realm of Ajnana and wants to get out of it, and for that he or she is Artha. And that's how the Artha becomes superior to Jignasu and Artharthi. Now he says you get out of that also, transcend that also, Trirupa Bhanga. Let love sweep your heart. And then these ideas of getting mukti and getting out of the bondage, getting out of ignorance, let all these ideas also be swept away by this current of love. That's the idea of Narada. Let love fill your heart so much that there won't be space for any kind of love that is within the realm of Maya. whether it is Sattvika love or Artha love. These are all in the realm of Maya. So let there be no place for any such love. That pure love, which is beyond the three gunas, which is beyond all motives, however higher that motive be, reign in our heart. That is the idea. See, some people say that devotees, true devotees, don't seek liberation. How is it? So when Swamiji answered, once they don't seek liberation because these true devotees, they don't see bondage at all. For them, God is everywhere, God is everything. So they don't see bondage at all. So where is the question of these devotees seeking liberation? For them, there is God within and God without. There is no bondage, there is no ignorance. So they don't seek liberation. So that is the stage that Narada is exhorting us that we should strive for. Trirupa bhanga purvakam premaiva karyam. And there is one more explanation of this Trirupa bhanga when Swamiji has given. He says there is breaking away, so to say, breaking off or breaking of the rigidity, so to say. When this love comes, devotee and God both give up their rigidity. And he gives the example, three types of rigidities. So the devotee is not rigid about his or her form. They say Radharani, she used to give up her female form and go into the forest when Sri Krishna went there to graze the cows, and would take any forms that would help Krishna, that would please Krishna. The devotee is not rigid about his or her form. So also the Lord is not rigid about form. When Hanumana went, Krishna gave up his Krishna form and took up that Ramachandra form. That Rupa Bhanga happens. Rupa Bhanga on the part of the devotee, Rupa Bhanga on the part of the Lord. And even the Seva, Rupa Bhanga also happens. Whatever is pleasing to the Lord, the devotee is willing to do. We see the example of Hanumana. Hanumana, for the sake of Rama, he is willing to do whatever work. If it is to be a courier, a messenger, a negotiator, a fighter, whatever work is demanded by God for his pleasure, Hanumana is willing to do. So that Seva Rupa Bhanga is also there. So Bhakta Rupa Bhanga, Bhagavan Rupa Bhanga and Seva Rupa Bhanga, all three Rupa Bhanga Purvakam Premaiva Karyam. That is another way of explaining this particular term. And then there was an explanation what kind of love it is. So it is Bhajanatmakam. It is of the form of loving service in a spirit of eternal servant or eternal wife. Now, these two are given just by way of mentioning one or two. The relations could be innumerable, any. It could be a relation of a child towards God, God's child or God's parent, God's sakha. Any relation is all right. The word is nitya. Important word is nitya. As we practice this spiritual life, especially the path of devotion, having a bhava towards God is important. It's quite useful, helpful. And that's what he is telling. So you should assume some bhava towards God. And we have these 5 bhavas, mainly 4 so far as devotee is concerned, dasya, sakhya, vatsalya, like that. And madhura. Sri Ramakrishna did not encourage madhura bhava, but the other 3, dasya, sakhya, vatsalya, or balaka, that is also all right. So some bhava we should have towards God. With that, we should lovingly serve God. And he says nitya, it is eternal, it is irrevocable, it is given once and for all. So we give ourselves once and for all to God and let that love sweep our heart. That is the goal. That is what Narada has put before us. All right. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Tashyatra.